Our next speaker is the special closing keynote. Joshua Saxe leads AI security integration at Meta, which probably all of you have on your phones, bringing expertise from roles as chief scientist at Sophos and principal investigator on DARPA programs, and as co-author of Malware Data Science. He combines deep machine learning and security knowledge to show how to deploy autonomous AI agents responsibly. Joshua?
Okay, yeah, thanks for the folks who invited me here. Yeah, excited to meet folks here today. As was said, I work at Meta, and I spent about half the year at Meta working on our strategy for securing the AI agents that we're building, both internally at Meta to secure, to do internal jobs within the company and also within our products. So this talk is really derived from that period of sort of thinking through our strategy for how we should approach deploying agents securely. Okay, so I'm going to give a kind of opinionated talk here and give some strong opinions about the way I think we should be thinking about this problem. I'd love to, folks, I'll be around after the talk. I'd love to hear folks' feedback about the argument I'm going to make here. But okay, so I want to argue that securing AI agents doesn't reduce to sort of traditional cybersecurity, nor does it reduce to the sort of machine learning safety research that's come into existence over the last 10 years or so, but in fact it requires that we sort of hybridize these two sets of technical approaches. And you know, I don't need to convince folks here that securing AI agents is probably like the defining cybersecurity problem of our era. This is the new sort of technological object that I think is going to come to, you know, it'll probably be I think AI agents are going to be the sort of dominant technical object of our generation of cybersecurity professionals. So I think I'm very interested in sort of how we approach this. Okay, so some folks here are probably familiar with the alignment problem as a sort of problem statement. So the alignment problem is a problem in machine learning where we would like for large language models to correctly follow our instructions while sort of obeying societal norms and our sort of ethical principles, right? So, you know, so the alignment problem in a security setting, for example, could mean if I'm asking an agent to clear some space on my hard drive, that agent has the implicit knowledge that doesn't mean doing rm and -rf / right? So ideally, we train our LLMs to sort of understand that that's probably not what I mean when I ask for some extra space on my hard drive, and it doesn't make that mistake. The issue with sort of framing AI agent security in terms of just alignment is that there's just sort of a philosophical ceiling on our ability to solve the alignment problem that's just too low. So, you know, so let's say I write bad poetry and I say, but I don't think my poetry is bad, you know, but then I ask my agent to go delete the bad poetry off my hard drive. You know, reasonable people can disagree about which files are bad poetry and which aren't. You know, mistakes can happen if an agent has a different view from my view. So, you know, so I think we need to align agents to get them to follow our instructions, but there's a sort of information theoretic limit on how well they can understand our instructions. Fortunately, in security, we've spent decades building controls that assume that sometimes even humans will be misaligned and sort of guardrail against malicious or erroneous behavior on our behalf. So let's say we have a doctor who's not necessarily malicious, who types in a command into a SQL database. Traditional security systems, right, establish permissions around who can do what, you know, enforce principles like least privilege, and prevent the kind of error that would, for example, delete all the medical records in a hospital. Okay, so I think it's important that we apply those kinds of controls to AI agents and that we guardrail their behavior. I also think it's important that we align agents and get them to sort of tune the underlying LLMs that are backing them, so that they follow our instructions in good faith and sort of based on our own implicit norms and ethics. But I think neither of these are enough. Here are some reasons why AI agent security doesn't reduce to traditional security. So, I mean, for one, we've never had to secure objects anything like AI agents before. So agents can't separate data from instructions. They're always going to have prompt injection risk. So that's why I think it's not enough. That's one reason why it's not enough just to sort of tune the agents. They don't afford traditional program analysis. So you can't. So like in a traditional program security setting, if you're trying to guardrail against like memory exploits or something like that, you can actually look into the sort of procedural logic within the binary codes. You can make enforcements like control flow graph integrity, make sure that that the traditional program isn't its instruction pointer isn't getting hijacked. We can't do those kinds of analyses with AI agents. But there's also there's some limitations to our ability to do traditional security on AI agents. There are also some new affordances. For example. You can pause an agent. You can look at its chain of thought, right? Which can give you some sort of probabilistic sense of what the agent is planning on doing. And if you think the agent is heading on a dangerous path, you can roll it back. We can also, unlike with like human security, we can sort of shrink and expand an agent's privileges in ways that we can't do with people. And you can also, you can control an agent's thought processes. Like you can, it's been shown that the longer you have an agent think about its next decision, the more aligned you can make it. So, anyways, we're in a sort of new territory here, and there's a lot of sort of limitations to what we can do with LLMs and a lot of affordances, and we're gonna have to think in a new way about how to secure AI agents. Okay, so here's sort of the thesis of this talk. So AI agents, I think, are gonna require a lot of new sort of innovation around machine learning security itself and ML alignment, and a lot of innovation around applying traditional security controls. So, for example, enforcing least privilege, doing detection and response around dangerous agent behaviors. So here's sort of what that synthesis looks like. So on the one hand, we want to enforce least privilege. So in every possible setting in which we don't have to grant like AI agents in hospitals the permission to delete medical records, right? We want to just enforce those with traditional security controls. But we also want to do sort of oversight of agents in a way that's more non-deterministic and probabilistic, right? So perhaps monitor agents with other sort of monitor machine learning models and guardrails and this kind of thing that sort of watch over what they're doing and making sure that within the scope of their least privilege, they are as aligned as possible. So here's like a coarse-grained sort of picture of the model that we're using at Meta to think about AI agent security. So in this inner circle, we have the agent itself that's backed by a large language model. It's the agent's permissions are as restricted as possible by deterministic controls, right? So we want to enforce the principle of least privilege on agents and make a guarantee that the agents can't do anything that's unacceptable. So for example, in a hospital setting, we might just say if the agent doesn't need to be able to delete rows from a database, it just in a deterministic sense, it should not have the ability to do that. But in order to make the agent useful, we need to give it some permissions. And within the scope of those permissions, that's where we apply guardrailing and alignment, and we fine-tune our LLMs to obey instructions. And then in the outer layer, we sort of monitor the agents and do detection and response to make sure that they're not sort of violating their deterministic security boundaries, and also within the scope of their privilege to make sure that they're staying as aligned as possible. And when we detect security incidents or misalignments, then we can go adjust the agents and correct them. This model, I think this is a durable way of thinking about agent security. Basically, for any risks that we want to drive, for any unacceptable risks, we apply deterministic security controls, and then for risks that we choose to accept, we apply probabilistic guardrails. It's not the way I think this model is going to change over time is as we grant agents more privileges. For example, trust them to find and fix vulnerabilities in code. Trust them to manage access permissions within an organization. So at Meta, that might mean like having an agent grant access to sensitive database tables. Like, we have lots of sensitive data at Meta from our products. We have to grant people access to those. If we're going to let an AI system grant that access. I mean, that's a sensitive thing. So I think over time we're gonna sort of grant agents more and more ability to change state in sensitive ways in our enterprises, but we're going to want to sort of dial up their level of trust in a controlled way. So the picture I want to get across here is like we want to sandbox our agents within within a sort of a sort of radius of trust via deterministic controls. But then within those sandboxes, we want to have a surveillance camera pointed at the agent, in which we're sort of even within that scope of trust, we're monitoring and making sure that they're behaving securely. But over time, I think we're gonna sort of dial up the size of that sandbox as we give agents more and more permissions. We're gonna have to do that very carefully, because within the sandbox, we can only sort of enforce probabilistic security mechanisms. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the history of security, before AI, and what lessons we might be able to learn, and looking at how that sort of maps onto the AI agent security problem. Okay, so I think there's a wealth of lessons in looking at how we approached the rollout of PCs into governments and workplaces over the last 30 or 40 years. So I think PCs are a case where we didn't follow the kind of security model that I'm talking about. So ideally, in PCs, we would have said, any executable that runs on a PC is automatically put into a kind of sandbox of least privilege, and can't control, it has very limited permissions outside of its necessary scope and range of action. In fact, right, what we built were systems, at least originally, in which anybody, even in a national security organization, right, could pick up a USB stick in the parking lot and plug it into their computer, and that would have access to all the files on the desktop on the computer's machine, and then could potentially help with lateral movement and hacking into other machines too. Yeah, I think so. So I think that's an example of what we don't want to do. The way people responded to that, in the 1990s, was instead of solving the sort of root of the problem, they built antivirus scanners, which are sort of equivalent to prompt injection guardrails today, I would say. They're sort of best effort security scanners that did sort of binary regex matching against binaries to sort of try to see if a file was malware or not. Those scanners didn't provide any guarantees, right, that a new malicious executable couldn't execute on somebody's machine. And I think that's a little bit what's going on today with sort of probabilistic guardrailing of AI agents. There's a little bit of a vibe, at least in some parts of the security community, that if we just apply enough guardrailing and self-reflection on the part of agents, that's enough to allow them to make sensitive decisions. That's clearly not, at least that's in my framing here, that's definitely not enough. Another thing we did that I think we can learn from is, so we built the internet on memory unsafe C and C++ codes that basically always had the risk of having memory exploits in it, and there's no, because of theoretical limits on what we can understand about programs, we could never prove for sure that these binary programs didn't have memory exploits in them, and we rolled out these programs to basically run the internet, right? So I'm old enough to remember as a high school hacker when almost all the name servers that ran the internet had remote code execution vulnerabilities in them, and we could just run rampant over the internet exploiting those vulnerabilities. And our response to that as a security community was instead of solving the root problem here, just to sort of partially patch the problem, apply patches when we found new memory exploits, implement probabilistic defenses like address space layout randomization, do partial solutions like data execution prevention, but none of that really solved the root of the problem, which would have been to move to like memory-safe languages, right? So the reason I'm raising these examples is I think there's a risk that we're doing that with AI agents now. I think actually that is happening. Like instead of following the model where we apply hard deterministic controls and boundaries on what agents can do to make sure that they can't take actions that impose unacceptable risk on organizations. Like a lot of organizations are just putting some guardrails in front of the agents that make no guarantees of working and just hoping for the best that agents don't actually compromise our security, which I think is not enough. Yeah, and so like the history of the security community is very much like, in many cases, instead of solving the root of the problem, we have like sort of a series of coin flips that are protecting us against risks, right? So you see this with like web application firewalls are a good example of that, right? Like the value proposition of a web application firewall is like, put this in front of your web application, and we'll do our best to detect SQL injection, which is like, actually we should like fix the underlying problem, which are the SQL injections themselves. And like too often, I think with AI agent security, we're making similar choices where we're trusting probabilistic guardrails over like more harder guarantees. Okay, so I feel like I've said all this enough, but yeah, I mean, I think the lessons of the last 30 or 40 years of security are that it's really a bad idea, right, to only use these kind of probabilistic guardrails. We really want to build like a limited trust radius around our agents as we roll them out, and like we're going to have to expand those trust radii as we employ AI agents as like full-fledged software engineers and as accountants and as decision makers. Around other kinds of sensitive, like access decisions and this kind of thing. But we should be intentional about like what risks, like what scope of action we allow agents, given their probabilistic sort of opaque nature and what we don't. I think we're going to want to coordinate our controls, right? So we just want to be really clear about the agent living in these concentric rings in which within a trust radius, we're doing our best to fine-tune the agents and to guardrail them and to prompt them in such a way that they behave securely. But then outside of it, they just don't have freedom of action. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think we're going to need to build to realize this framework. So here's how we're approaching it at Meta. So so in this kind of concentric shape diagram, in the inner layer we have the agents themselves. So at Meta we have like thousands of agents that are operating within our infrastructure, automating all sorts of processes. We want to secure the agents themselves, so I'll start there, and then we want to secure the other layers. But so at the level of the agents themselves, we've actually found that we can get significant mileage just through changing the way we prompt the agent. So like literally, actually there's good research papers that show, like for coding agents, if you just tell them you are a very secure programmer who like deeply cares about the security of their code, you can get like 20 or 30% improvement on like the number of the number of obviously vulnerable things that the agent is doing. So there's a lot to do. I mean, that's a simple example, but I think there's a lot to do at the level of an agent. I mean, with coding agents, you can also, in their system prompt, give them a long tutorial about what secure code looks like within your organization, and that can actually help influence the probabilities in terms of like the level of security of the code the agent is producing. So that's one level at which we operate. We also work on like fine-tune, so we have our own family of large language models at Meta, and we work on fine-tuning those to sort of behave more securely. Like we found, for example, that we can tune our underlying models to write more secure code, depending on the training data that we give them. So that's like one level at which we need to do security. The next level is we have guardrails that we use. So if an agent is processing untrusted data, like data from the web that might have prompt injections in it, we have like machine learning models and also regular expressions and this kind of thing that we use to filter that data. The next ring is what I kept talking about over the last 5 or 10 slides. It's deterministic controls. So we make a bunch of enforcements on our agents around, around what they can and can't do. For example, we don't allow our agents to, there's a set of sensitive decisions that we just don't allow our agents to make when they have untrusted data in their context window, right? And we enforce that deterministically, and we just make sure that that's never the case, because basically, if an agent has untrusted data that could be controlled by an attacker in its context window and is making a sensitive decision, you have a non-zero probability of a prompt injection affecting that decision. So we make deterministic enforcements around those kinds of things. And then finally, just like in the rest of security, the sort of the final layer of defense is a detection and response operation, where we're issuing alerts if we think the agent is doing something risky or anomalous. And then we have human investigators look at those alerts to see if there's some flaw in our security model or agents are sort of going off the rails in a certain way. So this is the way we're approaching it. And we've gotten a lot of mileage. I think this framework is a durable framework, and I can see this framework being the basic framing of the way that we should do agent security for a long time coming. And it's really not that different than other areas of security, I would say. But there's definitely a lot of complicated linkages between all these different layers and sort of new complexities that come up given that we're dealing with a sort of new category of technology. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a few more details here. There's going to need to be interaction between these layers, I would say. So for example, in terms of the way we tune our agents and the way we prompt them and design sort of MCP tools and this kind of thing, they're going to need to integrate into like our identity systems, for example. So like we've done a lot of work at Meta around attribution. So when an agent takes an action, so for example, lands a diff in our code base, we've sort of modified our identity system so that we know that like this agent is landing this code on Josh's behalf, and Josh, is a software engineer, and like he reports to this person, this sort of thing. This sort of thing is not built in. Like that kind of attribution is not built into modern identity systems, and we're going to need to sort of change them. So that's just like one way in which like the agent design itself has to sort of link into like an adapted sort of security model within an organization. We're also finding, so like in code security, which is a huge concern at Meta, and I think in any sort of software-oriented company, we're finding that we're needing to sort of integrate traditional methods like static analysis and taint analysis into our guardrails. So we've actually open sourced a bunch of guardrails. So we have a guardrail called Code Shields that does like live static analysis on code coming out of an agent. And like what you can do with that sort of thing is like, as an agent is producing code, the agent can see some like linter warnings coming out of our code analyzer, and then that can be feedback back into the agent, and it can say, oh, okay, I shouldn't use this, I just did a double free or something, or like I just used sprintf and I should have used snprintf. I need to go back and fix that. And so there can be sort of feedback between these new AI technologies and like old-fashioned program security, and this is the sort of thing that we're doing. But there's probably many such cases where we're going to need to sort of fuse older methods with AI security. And then in terms of deterministic controls, stuff that we're experimenting with right now is like using data provenance. So LLMs have like a context window that they use to compute the next token that they're going to predict. Ideally, and we're not there yet at Meta, I'm not sure anybody in the industry is, but like ideally, like we would like for every token in the context window to know its provenance, right? So we would I'd like to know, token in position 5 in the context window came from like an untrusted set of keystrokes from an untrusted user or from a web page that was loaded. Like, and if you know the provenance of all the data in the context window, you can use that to make deterministic judgments about what the agent can and can't do. So maybe if I know that there's a span of 30 tokens in the context window that came from an untrusted source, I just don't let the agent make purchases, right? Because there could be a prompt injection in there. But I think this is going to be very important for the future of agents, to really understand its state deeply and enforce security policy based on that. And then I think detection and response, the kind of work that goes on in security operations centers is going to need to change a lot also in this new AI era. So currently in security operations centers, there's there's two kinds of objects that get investigated. So one are sort of like human behaviors, like around insider threat and that kind of thing, and then the other are like machine behaviors around the possibility of infrastructure compromise and this kind of thing. But now there's this third category, which are AI behaviors, and there's a new set of affordances there, right? So for example, we can send chains of thoughts, right? Like the sort of hidden chains of thought that agents are using to make decisions to investigators, right? And if there's some sort of alert relative to an agent's behavior, it looks like maybe the agent became misaligned or were prompt injected, the investigator can actually look at the chains of thought or look at the sequence of tool calls. So I think that the shape of it, I don't think there's going to be enormous change in the way that we do investigations within security operations centers, but we're going to need to think clearly about how the sort of affordances of this new technology allow us to sort of understand agent security issues and then actually correct them in terms of updating agent prompts or updating the sort of privilege radius in which we're allowing them to operate. Okay, and then I wanted to call out some new research that I think is sort of going to be useful on our journey to implementing this security model. So how many people read this Camel paper? It's like, yeah, okay. It's at least one of us. So this paper has been like a topic of discussion ever since it came out, like probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. I think this is a cool paper in that it sort of hits on the themes of combining deterministic guarantee. So basically, it's a cool paper in that it allows us to make some deterministic guarantees around what an agent will or won't be able to do, which is actually pretty uncommon in the AI security space. Most technologies and research can only make probabilistic guarantees. And like the basic idea behind this paper, we'll see if I butcher this or not, but like is like we would like the agent to be able to make sensitive actions while also processing untrusted data. And furthermore, we would like to be able to make some like deterministic, provable guarantees that a prompt injection can't happen in this setting, right? So maybe I want an agent to be able to read all of my emails and then schedule a meeting, right? And you know, those emails, you know, by definition, can contain attacker-controlled content that might affect that action of scheduling a meeting. So what this paper proposes is, in order to do that, instead of the agent just doing like a naive loop in which it's sort of observing the world in the form of tokens and then taking actions in the form of like MCP calls, it observes the world and then it gets a user instruction and then it makes a plan and it writes that in Python. And then in a special Python interpreter, a Python interpreter looks at that plan and through traditional program analysis methods says that, okay, in this plan, the untrusted data won't be resident in the context window at the time that I take the sensitive action, and so I can guarantee that there's that separation, and the attacker data can't control the sensitive action. I think this is a cool framing of the problem, and there's all sorts of things that you can do when you frame the problem this way, right? So the LLM, you can use the LLM's judgment and intelligence to write a plan. Then you can use like control and data flow analysis, right, to basically detect if there are security issues with that plan, to give the LLM feedback into how to revise the plan, and then ultimately to make a guarantee, enforce a security policy, right, that says that you can only take sensitive actions when you're not processing untrusted data. We've talked a lot about the CAMEL paper at Meta. Actually, Eduardo, who was the first author, was at Meta for the last 4 or 5 months as an intern. We talked with him a lot about the paper. We ultimately did not implement CAMEL into any of our systems just because it's like a very heavyweight system and it's very hard to get product teams to actually implement it. But I think there's some lighter weight versions of CAMEL that are definitely, like, we could definitely implement. We haven't done it yet, but folks that are interested in this area and want to talk afterwards, definitely approach me because I'm super interested in how we get this into actual fast-moving product organizations. There are some interesting standardization efforts going on. I think agent identity is very important. It's very important to get right in order to make the kind of deterministic guarantees that I'm arguing we're going to need to make in agent security. So this agent name service paper came out of OWASP and is a proposal around how to create like a cryptographically verifiable sort of DNS-like agent identity infrastructure for the internet. I think this is going to be very important to know that when an agent is taking an action, either inside of our networks or on the public internet, on whose behalf that agent is taking the action, which agent that actually is, and to have that in some sort of verifiable form. And then I also, in terms of alignment, there's a bunch of interesting work going on around monitoring both the hidden states and the observable states of agents. So a couple of us at Meta and across the industry wrote this position paper on chain of thought monitorability, which I think is really important. I won't go into detail, but happy to talk about it afterwards. We've worked on open sourcing a guardrail framework also for agents. I'm mostly just pitching our own work here. I mean, there's like a lot of really good work happening in the guardrailing space. I think when situated in the right sort of part of the security model, this work is also really important. Okay, wrapping up. Yeah, so what I'm arguing here, I think it might seem somewhat obvious, but I think often gets confused in our discussions, right? So there's a lot of discussion about fine-tuning models to reduce the attack success rate of, say, prompt injections or other like adversarial examples and other modalities. And there's a lot of discussion of like yeah, I mean, like most of the discussion in our field, I think right now, like, is centered on these sort of like non-deterministic security protections around fine-tuning and guardrailing. There's other discussions that often I think happen very separately around sort of applying old-fashioned security to AI agents, like least privilege and identity. What I'm arguing here is that those discussions are going to need to be fused, and we need to be able to think about them in the same frame of reference. And that, like, I think the dominant model here should be that we're like sandboxing an agent inside of a padded room, right? Which that padded room is represented by the sort of radius of deterministic controls that we're imposing upon the agent. But then we're also aligning the agent through fine-tuning and guardrails to make sure that it understands that RM-RF, tilde old medical records is really a bad idea and it disobeys our norms. And we also have an intense detection and response organization sort of focused on the agent via those security cameras, right, that are sort of monitoring the agent to make sure it really isn't going to be able to escape the sandbox. It really is doing the right thing, right? And so I think this sort of fuses those sort of conceptual frames into one picture. I'm not naive, right? So I think that in every sort of technically ambitious organization, we're talking about giving agents a ton of autonomy, having them function as junior security analysts and junior software engineers. So that the size of that padded room is going to have to expand every time, but I think it's still important to keep that in the conceptual frame. Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say is, I think this is like the most exciting security problem that's likely to happen in our careers, right? I think we're at the very beginning of the sort of agent, the sort of S-curve of agent adoption. I think that I don't see any reason to believe that we're not going to continue in the current really breathtaking trajectory of progress that we're on in AI. So like solving agent security, I think, is a super exciting area to work in. It's really I don't know. I think it gives one pause if one looks back at how we've secured previous technological paradigms. Like, we've gotten a lot of things wrong. But we're at the very beginning of this journey, so we have the opportunity to do things better and get things right this time. And I think this is my... there should be a conclusion slide, but it's not advancing. So I'll stop there. And yeah, I would love to talk to people afterwards. Thanks for having me.